It's going to be an exercise to try out how you can select page elements and then also how you can get properties from those elements, selecting the background color, updating the background color, generating random background colors. Whenever you click any of the buttons, it's going to update the background of the entire body object. It's creating a table, so it's just going to dynamically adjust. You can set the number of rows, the number of columns that you want for the table, and the JavaScript code will construct that table. We also have some options where we can click to move all of the colors down. So when we click the move down button, what it's doing is it's taking the color values from the cells above and shifting them down to the ones below, and then randomly generating the first row of colors for all of the columns. There's also a move left button. So what this does is this is going to take the color from the right hand side and apply it to the element, giving a effect that the elements are moving to the left when you click the button. So it's shifting the background color to the left whenever the button is clicked. So that's what we're going to be working on. That's what we're going to be creating in this lesson. Go ahead and open up your HTML page and link it to a JavaScript file. Using the document query selector, select the page element that you want to interact with on the page. I'm going to give it a variable name of output and then try it out within the console just to make sure that we do have the connection established properly. I'm going to clear out the existing content within the HTML, and that will just be a blank HTML, so that removes out the existing content. We want to create a table, so let's create a function, and this function will manage creating the table. So create a function called add table. It's going to require a few parameters. So one is going to be the parent that we're going to be adding it to. The next is going to be the number of rows, and then the number of columns. And then we'll loop through these values and dynamically add a table to the page, depending on what the parameters are that we're adding in here. Let's create a function, and we're going to call to this function. The parent is going to be the output element. The number of rows that we want to make for this table, make 5 rows or 5 rows and 4 columns. So add that function in. So now the function is going to run, and we need to construct it in order to create a table. So go ahead and create the main table object. I'm going to give it a name of table. And actually just shorten this to TBL, and using the document create element, and the element that we're creating is the table element. So we're going to be adding that to the page. And then the last thing that we want to do is we want to append it to the page. So we're going to return back the parent, append child, and that will be the table object that we just created. So that will add the table to the page. Next, we want to add in the rows, inserting the rows. But before we do that, let's add some style properties to the table. So selecting the border and applying a border, and we'll do a black border around the table. So that creates the table. That little dot there is the representation of the table, as we don't have any rows or columns yet for it. So we can do this with a for loop. So letting the value of y, which will be the rows, and looping through while I is less than the number of rows. And this is going to be a numeric value. And at this point, we're passing in a value of 5. We're going to increment the value of y by 1. So we want to insert a row into the table. So creating a table row. And if we want to add it into the table body, we're going to create another element, and then this is going to be the table body. So table body, and using the document create element, create all elements, and the one that we're creating is going to be the table body. So the T body element, and that one is the one that we're going to hold all of the rows and columns within. Also, we need to append that to the table. So taking the table object and append, and let's add in the table body. And we can add the rows to the table body. This actually should be a semicolon. And as we loop through the rows, let's create a table row, elements, and once again using the document create element, and we'll create a table row. And then this is going to be the table row object where we're going to add in the columns into. The columns also need to have a loop, so that's going to be starting with 0 and looping through while x is less than columns, and then incrementing x by 1. Within the table cells, this is where we're going to create the table cells, and using the create elements, and then these are going to be the table cells. For now, we can just add in some content into the table cell, and we can add in content into the text area. I'm going to set up a default value and call it counter. And this is what we can use to increment every time we add a new table cell. We're going to increment the counter by 1. And then within the text content, right now we'll just put the counter value. So that should create a table. And then after we've created the table row, we need to append the table cell to the table row. And we also need to append the table row to the table body. So that's the one that we created here, where it's going to contain all of the table content. So the table body gets the table row appended to it, and that's going to create our page element that's going to be the table. We can also apply some styling properties. So for the table, apply the style, and let's set a width. And because we do have 4 columns across, we'll make the width dynamic, where I'll set a width dynamically using the number of columns. So we'll take a value of 100 divided by the number of columns. So that will give us a percentage, and wrap that within brackets, and then we'll multiply it by 100. So set the width, and this is going to now dynamically change depending on how many columns that we have, and we need to add in the pix. So if we are to update this and to have 3 columns, that should dynamically change the number of columns there. So it's automatically going all the way across. Let's add to the table cells and add in a style. So we can set a border for it, and the style that we're adding is going to be a border. So just a regular string value. So we'll pick solid and make it a very light border color. Also for the table cells, style, text align, and I'll center align the text. So there we've got all of the text content centered for the elements. So that's how you can create a table using code. Let's do some more stuff now that we've got the table created. Let's add in some random background colors to the elements for the table. And we can add in a button on the page in order to do that. So we'll create a few buttons that are going to do some stuff for the content of the page. So button 1. And I'll create a function that's actually going to create the button. So this will be function. I'll call it button maker. And for button maker, we need to know what the parent element is that we're attaching it to. The content, so I'll just call it HTML. The color that we want to use for the button, and also the font color. So those are the parameters that we're going to ask within the button maker. So this will give us a function that we can use in order to create buttons and create multiple buttons, because we're going to need a few buttons in order for this exercise. So applying the button, we're going to create the button elements using the document create element, just as we did with the table elements, and create a button element. And for the button, add in we can set the inner HTML for the button, and that could just be coming from HTML in case we want to add some HTML. Button style, and this is the background color for the button, so whatever color we've got here, so dynamically. And then for the button style, for the color value for the text color, we'll use the font color variable. And then return that button because we want to attach the event listener to the element variable. So that's why we want to return back. So appending using the parent. Use the append, it's not going to return back the element. So that's where we need to use the append child. So once again, we use the append child and send the button object back. The HTML is not defined, and because I haven't actually populated these parameters, so passing in the output argument, and it will just be random for random colors. Let's make the background color blue, and we'll make the font color white. So there we've got our random button. And I'm going to do this after we add the table to the page. So I want them at the bottom of the table. Let's create a few other buttons. So this one will, and maybe make this button red. So I have a few buttons. And move down will move the colors down. So we'll take the column from the row above, and then we'll shift the colors down and we'll generate new colors for the top ones. So that will be another interesting effect. So let's create and add the event listeners. And the event that we're listening for is going to be a click happen. And we can just have the anonymous function within the button element. And I'll also add in the event listener for the second button as well. So we want to select out all of the TD elements that are contained within the main table object. And that's the one that we're constructing over here. So where we're adding the table. And I'll just give this one a value of main so that we can reference the main table object and do a query selection. And because this is going to be global, we can access it, the table object, from within the buttons. So using the main and then query selector all. So this is if we have a second table, it's not going to interfere with the first table. So using the query selector all, we're referencing that main table and selecting all of the table cells that are available. And create a variable, call it TDS. So that's going to list out all of the table cells that we have and output it into the console whenever we press the random. So selecting all of those elements. And now we want to loop through those elements and update the color randomly. So create a function in order to generate a random number. We can use math random in order to generate a random hex value. So we use math random. That's going to return back a 0 and then a decimal place with a bunch of digits after that. This is always going to be a random number, and it's never going to be 1, but it's going to be just before 1 and all the way from 0 all the way up. And in order to get math random as a hex value, we can convert it to string and returning back the hex value, which would be 16 for base 16 of a string. So that's going to return back those characters as a random value as a hex. And now we want to extract out the 6 characters from it. So we don't want the 0 and we don't want the decimal place, but we want the characters after that. And we can use another string method in order to accomplish that, and that's going to be the slice. So depending on where we want to start the slice, we want to start at index number 2 and then retrieve back those values up to 8. And that's going to return back and allow us to generate a random math value that we can return back, creating a color for the user. So creating a function, random color, and then we don't need to have any variables. We can just do a return. We need to include the hash and then the JavaScript code in order to renovate and to update and generate that random color. So now we can use this function when we want some random colors. So as we loop through each one of the elements, we return the element back within the for each loop so that we can check out within the console and run the function. So it selects each one of the page elements. And this is where also, once we have the element within the L object, we can update the style, and that's going to be the background color that we're going to set. So we're going to randomly set a background color for the elements. So So now let's go over and we'll try it out. So now whenever we click the random button, it's generating a random color for the elements. Let's update and we'll select this other one. And this one is also going to loop through all of the elements. But what we want to do is we want to select the content from the element that's above it. So we want to go to the parent and then get the parent of the parent, which would be the table, and select the page element that is going to be above it. Or we could subtract the number of columns from the value, from the index value, and then that would return back the element, and we could match the color of that element. So let's try this out where we're going to do a for loop for each loop. As we loop through each one of those, we're going to also pick up the index value of the element, and we'll have a condition to take the index value and we're going to subtract the value for the rows, which was contained within the row value. So we're going to create an object that's going to hold the number of rows so that we can dynamically use these values. So create the object and rows. So the value for rows is 5. The value for columns is going to be 4. And then now we can reference these values as we need to. So the number for rows is first. The second value is going to be the value for columns. And now we can update the number of rows and columns within the object value. And we still are able to generate the tables, so that's still working. So now we can do a condition to get the index value and subtract. So the index value, subtracting the number of table value columns. And we want to make sure that this value is greater than or equal to 0. So if it's not, then we just want to set a random color for the cell. And if it is, then we can select the value of the element that's above it. And we can return back the color value of the element because we're going to have them all as a node list within the TDS. So we'll console log from the TDS, and let's actually going to create a temporary value, and we'll log out the temporary value into the console. And we can check on the temporary value if it's greater than or equal to 0. So let's log out the temporary value, and this is going to be the temporary index value of the cell. And then we can also select the cells as well. So let's see what happens. We hit random. And now let's try the move down. So that generated all of those cells. So the first 4 are going to be skipped when it hits 0. Then it's going to be able to output that. So this value is going to be the cell that's above the initial one. If they are negative values, then we're just going to reset the color. Otherwise, we're going to take the color from the cells above it. So let's first, we'll generate the cell colors. So we can get the element, and I'll just call it L, and that's going to be within the TDS temp. So that's selecting the element, and then get the style property of the element, and we'll get the background color value. So press random to color them, and then now we're able to pick up the color value of the element. Let's actually get the text content of the element above it, and we'll also get the text content of the element itself. So we'll get the first value will be the text content of the element above it, and the second value will be the element itself. So create the random colors for the elements, and then do the move down. So cell number 20, we're going to get the color from cell with the text of number 16. So let's select that, and we're just going to make the update to the element and set the style and then background color, and assign the value of the background color to what we have for the element, style and background color. So let's select the colors, and now they're moving them down. And unfortunately what it's doing is it's taking all of them So we want to actually reverse this, and we don't want to overwrite the colors while we're looping through. So let's create a temporary holding array that we can use. And for this array, this is where we can populate the colors into this array. So instead of having them automatically update, we want to have them populate, and then afterwards we're going to loop through there and generate the color. So if this is not true, we'll set a value for temp color, and right now that will be blank. If the value, we're going to update the temp color, so we can comment this out, and for the temp color, we're going to be assigning a value of the element that's going to be above it. So that's going to be the color that we're assigning in temp color. And then for temp color, we'll take holder and we'll push the value of temp color into it. So the effect needs to be that we want to get the color from the row above, and we want to store it into the holder array so that we can loop through the holder array and update the colors of the other ones afterwards, which will have this downshifting effect. If the value is not greater than 0, so that's going to be for the first row, we can select it and generate a random color for the element, and we do have the function for that as well. So that will generate a random color, and for both cases we're going to push those values into the holder array. So that will build an array as it loops through all of the table cells, and within the console we'll output what we have for holder, and then after we'll loop through holder, clear it, and do a move down. So this gives us an array of 20 items with the new colors that we want to set for the background colors of the elements. So now take holder and looping through each one of those. We want to get the value and then use that value setting the index value of the element. And we have the elements within the TDS. So TDS, and then update the style property for background color and set that to what we have for value. We pick up the index value, and for TDS we do need an index value. So that's where we're throwing the error. Let's apply the colors, clear, and so now it should be moving the colors down one row. Let's update the number of columns that we have and see if that still is going to work. So let's do 6 columns, random, and so now we're able to move the color down one row, which provides us this type of effect for the cells. Let's make the elements clickable, where we can select the element and that will update the background color of the body. So after where we were creating the elements, when we were adding the table, we can add in this within the TD and add an event listener to the TD. So add event listener, and the event that we're listening for is going to be a click. So when it gets clicked, we'll run a function and take the document body object and style the background color of the body and assign whatever color we have for the current element. So that's for the TD style, and this will automatically take whatever background color that we have and assign it to the background color of the body. Let's move it down. Now we can click them and update the background color of the body of the page. Let's create one more button, and this button will shift everything over to the right. So move, or we can move left and set a color for the button. So let's do it as purple. So when that button gets clicked, so adding the event listener for button 3, and when that button gets clicked, what we want to do is we want to select all of the elements and then loop through those elements, and we're going to apply the property. So this time we're actually going to be using the for loop, and this is going to give us a way to pick up the value from the previous cell. Add the for loop, and this is starting at index value of 0, and we want to go to where we've got TDS length. And the reason we're adding -1 is because I don't want to do the last cell. The last cell is just going to be a random value because there's going to be no value to the right of it that we want to select. So as we loop through the elements, we can select the element with the TDS I. So that's going to be the active one. Set the style and then background color. And we want to grab the background color of the element that's next to it. So that's going to be TDS with an index value of +1 and get the background color for that element. So random and then now move right. So what it's doing is it's shifting the values over to the right, and notice that all of these ones are still staying the same. So what we want to do for the last one is we want to just generate a value. So after we finish the loop, or we can do it within the loop where we check to see if we're at the value of I is equal to what we had for the TDS length, and then we can set a color for it, and the condition is going to be to check to see if I is equal to TDS length, and then we'll also output I into the console. So if this condition is met, then we want to generate a random color, and we already have the function in order to generate the random colors. So we can just select to generate a random color in its place, or we can select the +1 value and return back a color for that. And then we just need to assign the background color to the cell. So it looks like what's happening is we're only getting to 28. So we need to adjust the condition to check to see if the value of I +1 is going to be equal to that. We'll clear it, we'll run it again, and output the background color into the console while we're debugging it, and remove out the -1. So now it's generating a random color for the last cell, and then when we click move right, taking color of the element next to it to the right of it and applying that color. And actually this is actually moving it to the left. Since the color is being applied from right to left, we'll update that. So random, move down, move left, generating a random value for the last cell. When you click on any of the cells, it updates the background color to whatever cell that we've selected. So go ahead and try it out to get more familiar with how you can select page elements, how you can update their background properties, all using JavaScript code.